Hello everyone and welcome back to another Tom Clancy's The Division 2 video. Okay, so I'm sure many of you won't find it too surprising that build videos are one of the most popular types of content on YouTube. And rightfully so, because players want to know what all others are using to fuel their own inspiration, right? And for beginners, it can be overwhelming, because there are just so many builds to choose from that are viable and may fit your playstyle. Like for instance, you may find a really good PvE build that you like, but you may also have a ton of questions like, will this build work for the Incursion as well? Or will it be good for the Darkzone, so on and so forth. So being a veteran Division 2 player and playing this game loyally since the open beta days, I've learned a lot and managed to fine-tune my builds down to what's relevant and what works. And by doing so, I compiled a top 5 list of builds I believe everyone should have in their loadout. So if you need a reliable build for the Incursion, bounties, raids, or the Darkzone, then I've got you covered. We're going to be breaking down a great beginner-friendly solo Darkzone PvP build that not only has great damage, but great survivability as well. This should help you stay alive a lot longer in the Darkzone, as well as other great builds that I'm sure you will love to see. But just real quick before we get into these top 5 builds, if you guys are looking for some great Division 2 PvP content, then you should check out my friend's channel, Beatris Sexton. She has some great Darkzone and conflict gameplay footage on there, and I don't know who edits her videos, but they're fire. So if you guys are interested, I'll leave a link to her channel so you can check her out. But anyway, without further ado, let's check out these top 5 builds. Okay, so let's start this list off with one of my personal favorites, Striker's Battlegear. Striker is definitely in the spotlight, and it shouldn't really be a surprise considering how powerful this gear set is. I believe that everyone should have at least one loadout with a Striker build setup, but some of you may be wondering which Striker setup works the best. And there isn't really one specific Striker setup that works the best, but there are some that will work better than others depending on the activity you're doing. For instance, if you're going to run the Paradise Lost Incursion, you may find it better to use the Striker vest in combo with the Striker backpack for more overall weapon damage. So you can basically swap out the Fenris Group AB vest and swap out the Striker holster with the Picaro's holster and go all red, since you will more than likely have a healer in your Incursion group. But for solo PvE farming, this Striker setup works exceptionally well. I find that having the Obliterate talent goes hand in hand with Striker, and having the Striker bag will add more overall weapon damage. The St. Elmo's Engine Exotic Assault Rifle is a great addition to this build and is great for crowd control because of its weapon talent, which grants you shock ammo after landing 100 shots. This really helps to stun NPCs in legendary difficulty missions, making it a lot easier to complete. And having the ACS-12 shotgun as a secondary can help build up Striker stacks incredibly quick. And for those of you who are new and don't know what I mean by that, I'm basically talking about the Striker's Gamble talent, which gives you an increased 0.65% weapon damage upon each weapon hit per stack. This gets increased to 1% if you have the Striker backpack equipped thanks to the risk management talent. This is why having the backpack is crucial if you want to deal out more damage. So for the skills, I recommend going with the Ballistic Crusader Shield as your primary, and if you're solo, the Reviver Hive or Decoy will work great. If you're in a group, you may also find the Booster Hive helpful for you and your team. Using the booster will give you laser beam accuracy because the Booster Hive will increase your weapon handling, which will stack with the 15% increased weapon handling that you get from having 2 pieces of Striker equipped. You can also use the Banshee Pulse for additional crowd control from the Gunner specialization, which I recommend for PvE farming. Gunner will give you bonus armor for using an armor kit, as well as a 10% armor on kill bonus, which helps a little with survivability. Okay, for the stats, 48% critical hit chance and 157% critical hit damage. And by the way, in case you're wondering why my critical hit chance is a bit low, that is because I'm wearing the Coyote mask, which will give you an additional 10% critical hit chance. It's not showing it on my stats, but it's there. It's like an invisible stat, so to speak. But yeah, it would be in your best interest not to exceed 50%. The Coyote mask works great with this build as well. Having this mask equipped will give you a bonus critical hit chance and damage. And the further you are from the enemy, the more critical hit damage you will get, making this a great piece to use for assault rifle builds. Now, if you want to take this build into the Darkzone, it will work fine as it is. But if you decide to PvP, then I recommend swapping the vest for a Fenris group piece with the Unbreakable talent for more survivability. Having more survivability will give you a huge advantage when fighting players in the Darkzone, especially if you're outnumbered. You can even swap out the Coyote mask for the Catharsis mask if you have one. The Catharsis mask has benefits that will increase your survivability. And if I were you, I would also change your weapon specialization to Firewall. Having Firewall will increase your survivability as well because you will recover 200% of your armor and health from using an armor kit. And this is highly favorable for PvP. Going all blue with Striker won't hurt because Striker is a very powerful gear set and you will still be hitting extremely hard. Okay, so moving on to the second build on this list, this build is definitely a must-have, especially if you're a PvE player, and that is a one-shot rifle or marksman rifle build. This one-shot rifle build is great for fast XP farming out in the open world, and it's one of my favorite builds to use for clearing control points. You can clear control points in no time using this build, and if you still need any of the crafting station blueprints, by the way, then using this build to clear control points quickly would be a fast way to attain them. This will even work for bounty and summit farming as well. Okay, so there are some weaknesses and downsides to this build that I will be addressing here in a second, but the weapon that I'm using is the 1886 rifle, which is a great weapon to use for this one-shot rifle build. This build is very effective because of the two talents Perfect Headhunter and Determined. These two talents are like best friends and work extremely well together. So basically, killing an enemy with a headshot will activate both these talents, and Determined will allow your next shot to be a headshot regardless of where you shoot the target. On the other hand, the Perfect Headhunter talent will give you a huge headshot damage buff, which will allow you to chain kill enemies, hence why this named Walker Harris chest piece is called Chain Killer. And with that being said, the downside for this build is that firstly, you will need to get that initial headshot kill in order to start this chain killing spree, and sometimes it can be tricky and you may need to get 2 headshot kills to keep it going. And secondly, you may lose this chain killing effect on heavily armored NPCs. These NPCs may not always die in one shot, so keep that in mind. Hopefully that's not too confusing for you new players, but just so this video isn't insanely long, I've made a video on this build, and if you guys would like to see it, I'll leave a link in the description for your convenience. I go into much greater detail in that video, but in the meantime, let's move on to build number 3. This next build is a skill damage build that I believe everyone should have in their loadout. This build is very effective at XP farming and has a great amount of skill damage. One of the amazing benefits of using this build is not having to worry about running out of ammo. This gives a great opportunity to activate directives such as Pistolero and Ammo Hoarders. This build is extremely fun to use and is a bit of a lazy way to get through endgame content. The way I have it set up is great because having the waveform holster will give your skills a huge damage boost, and since you will be in cover a lot, having one-piece Bellstone for that 1% armor regen is a bit helpful. Now again, I have a more in-depth breakdown of this build in another video, so I'll leave that link in the description as well in case you're interested in checking it out. Otherwise, I'll be sitting here talking to you guys for hours. Okay guys, moving on to build number 4. This next build is a great beginner build for the Darkzone. This build actually used to be meta until the Ouroboros Strikers set combination became a thing. But what makes this a really good build for beginners is that it will perform great at 0 expertise and the pieces aren't really that hard to acquire. Just remember that everyone's RNG is different, so if you're not having any luck, I encourage you to try farming in a different area, because some players have better luck getting certain gear pieces from different endgame activities. For me, I tend to get the St. Elmo's exotic assault rifle to drop for me very easily in Countdown for some reason, but that's just an example, right? And I recommend you go all blue with this build if you are able to. That will help increase your survivability because this build has great damage already coming from multiple sources. For one, having the named Contractor's Gloves will give you a bonus 8% damage to armor, and the Fox's Prayer knee pads will give you 8% damage to target out of cover, which will increase your overall damage output. The damage to target out of cover attribute is great for PvP because virtually nobody takes cover. This build also performs quite well in conflict. Having at least one PvP build, whether you like to PvP or not, won't hurt, right? You may decide one day to give the Darkzone a go, and if you do, well, here you go, give this build a try. If you guys would like to see a more in-depth build breakdown of this PvP build, let me know in the comments section. I will be more than happy to make a video. But anyway, let's move on to the last build on this list. This next build is definitely worth having in anyone's loadout. This is a Perfect Spotter AR build. Perfect Spotter is very viable whether you are engaging in PvP fights or if you're doing some solo PvE runs. The major downside, however, is that survivability on this build is practically non-existent, but the damage that you can deal out truly makes up for it. This build just hits so damn hard with all the multiplicative damage that it has. You can increase your survivability by just rolling more blue core attributes, but honestly, you will get better results going all red with this. And as the old saying goes, a great offense makes a great defense, right? This build is great for literally any content in the game, even conflict PvP. So for the primary weapon, I'm using the FAL SA58. I know many of you may prefer using the Kingbreaker, but the FAL is actually a better option. Take a look for yourself. Both weapons have the same RPM, right? And not only does the FAL have more stability and slightly more accuracy than the Kingbreaker, but it has more total weapon damage as well. And the Kingbreaker is at expertise level 20, 3 levels higher than the FAL, and the FAL still hits harder. However, the Kingbreaker comes with perfect flatline, which gives you 20% damage to pulsed enemies, as opposed to the regular flatline, which gives 15%. So a 5% difference, right? But you don't really have to use the FAL if you don't like it. Use whichever you prefer. They both are great weapons. The only small downside, however, is that the FAL has a 40-round mag size compared to the Kingbreaker, which has a 50-round mag size, but that isn't really big of a deal. The Coyote Mask really gives this build a great amount of damage because of the bonus critical hit chance and damage you get from it. And since this is a mid to long range build, it works out great. For the vest, the named closer chest piece comes with the Talent Perfect Spotter, and it's actually pretty easy to get. You can get it very easily from either farming Bellstone targeted loot drops or by farming chest pieces. Perfect Spotter will give you a 20% damage increase to pulsed enemies, and since it's amplified damage, you will be hitting like a tow truck. And for those who may not know, the Talent Flatline on this weapon works great with Spotter. Flatline will further amplify your weapon damage by 15%. Amplified weapon damage has a greater impact than just having increased weapon damage, so there's a difference, right? So you're basically getting 35% amplified weapon damage just from the Perfect Spotter vest and the Flatline talent alone. This doesn't even factor in the Fox's Prayer knee pads yet, which gives an 8% damage to targets out of cover. Having the Contractor's Gloves further increases your damage with the 8% damage to armor attribute. These named gloves are extremely popular for DPS builds because of how much they increase your damage output. Next is the Picaro's Holster, which comes with a 15% weapon damage attribute that's really nice to have. Last but not least, for the backpack, one piece of the Grupo Sombra brand set for the 15% critical hit damage bonus. The Vigilance talent on this backpack will increase your total weapon damage by 25%, but taking damage disables this buff for 4 seconds. This isn't really big of a deal though because most of your gunfights will be from mid to long range, so you can expect to have that damage buff up more often. So if you decide to use this build, make sure you go with the Technician specialization. This is because you want to have the linked laser pointer. The linked laser pointer is the long barrel attachment that you can unlock right here for those who don't know. And this attachment goes on the underbarrel rail of your weapon, and it will basically help you pulse enemies just by aiming at them, which will activate both the Flatline and Spotter talents. For the skills, I recommend a Ballistic Crusader Shield and a Reviver Hive if you're doing some PvE, and a Defender Drone and Decoy if you're doing PvP. The Decoy is a must, in my opinion, for PvP because it will hide your name HUD from players, making it harder for them to spot you. This gives you the element of surprise. But if you decide not to use Decoy with this build and you go all red with it, then not only are you a savage, but I would advise you to be aware of your surroundings. This is Prajna. Thank you so much for watching the video. I'm sorry for the long video, but if you made it this far, you are truly an amazing person, and I really mean that. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. Keep it cool, keep it classy, and peace out.